What if I told you the most important moment in human history wasn't a war, or an invention, or a discovery? It was one person, standing in a garden, deciding whether or not to take a bite of fruit. And what if that moment went differently? Stay with me, because this isn't a Sunday school retelling. This is a look at the oldest decision-making mistake in human history, and it's the exact same mistake you and I still make today, just with different fruit. By the end of this video, you're going to look at temptation completely differently, not as a moral failure, as a pattern you can actually spot before it happens to you. Here's the twist though. I'm not here to tell you Adam and Eve were bad people. I'm here to show you they were normal people, doing something every single one of us does on a random Tuesday. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Let's talk about why almost everyone gets this story wrong. Most people hear Adam and Eve and think disobedience, rule broken, punishment given, end of story. It gets filed away as an old fable about listening to your parents. But that reading misses the most interesting part of the whole thing. It wasn't really about the fruit. It was about how the doubt got planted in the first place. Because here's something people skip right past. Eve didn't wake up that morning planning to disobey God. Nobody does that. Nobody sits down and thinks, today, I will make the worst decision of my life. So if that's not how it happened, how did it happen? This is where it gets interesting. The serpent didn't argue with a rule. He asked a question. Did God really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden? Notice what that question does. It doesn't attack the rule. It exaggerates it. It makes one small restriction sound like a total, unreasonable ban. And once that exaggeration is planted, the next step is easy. Now the rule doesn't sound like protection anymore. It sounds like control. It sounds like something is being kept from you. This is the exact same three-step pattern behind almost every bad decision made today. Reframe the boundary setter, then offer the freedom on the other side. Sound familiar? It should. Because you've heard this pattern before, just wearing different clothes. Let me show you what I mean. Picture someone named Maya. Maya has one simple rule for herself. She doesn't touch her savings account. That's it. One boundary. It's worked for 3 years. Then a friend mentions a can't miss investment. At first, Maya says no. The rule holds. But then the friend says something small. Wow, that savings account is basically doing nothing for you anyway. You're just letting the bank use your money for free. Do you see it? That's the exact same move. The boundary, don't touch savings, gets reframed as something unreasonable. Not protection, restriction. A week later, the rule doesn't feel like safety anymore. It feels like Maya is missing out on something everyone else already knows. She transfers the money. 3 months later, it's gone. Maya didn't lose her money because she's careless. She lost it the same way Eve took the fruit. The boundary got quietly reframed before the decision ever got made. That's the hidden psychology here, and it's worth slowing down on. Every temptation, money, food, a relationship you know isn't good for you, follows this same 3-part sequence. First, the rule gets exaggerated to sound extreme. Second, the rule giver gets painted as unfair or withholding something good. Third, and only third, comes the actual offer. By the time the offer shows up, the real decision already happened back at step 1. The fruit itself was never the decision point. The reframing was. This is why willpower alone rarely works. You can't out-willpower a decision you've already unconsciously made 2 steps earlier. So what would it have actually taken for Adam and Eve to obey? Let's walk through it plainly, because just obey God sounds simple and isn't. Step 1. They would have needed to notice the reframing in real time, not after eating the fruit, the moment the question, did God really say, was asked. Step 2. They would have needed to go back to what they actually knew, not what was just suggested to them. They knew the boundary. They knew the reason. One tree, one rule, endless garden of everything else. Step 3. And this is the part almost everyone misses. They would have needed to end the conversation. Not win the argument, end it. Every extra minute spent debating a temptation is a minute the outcome gets less certain. That third step is the real lesson, and it shows up everywhere once you know to look for it. Here's a real-world version of it. Think about someone who's decided not to check work email after 7 p.m. One night, a notification pops up. They think, I'll just look. I won't respond. That's the reframing. Just look sounds harmless. The people who protect the boundary don't win an internal debate about whether to look. They don't even open the phone. The decision was already made earlier, before the notification ever came. The people who lose the boundary do the opposite. They treat every single notification as a fresh debate. And eventually, on a tired night, they lose one of those debates. That's the whole Eden story, replayed in a kitchen at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. Now here's where most people trip up trying to apply this lesson, so let's name the mistake directly. The common mistake is believing the fix is try harder or have more discipline in the moment of temptation. That's like trying to stop a car after it's already halfway down the hill. Technically possible, extremely hard, usually too late. People keep re-entering the negotiation. They keep asking, did God really say? Over and over, dressed up as new questions about a new temptation. And they keep being surprised when the answer to, should I take the bite, ends up being yes. So what do the people who consistently make the better call actually do differently? They don't rely on willpower in the moment at all. They design the moment out of existence before it arrives. They don't keep tempting notifications on their home screen. They don't keep the can't-miss investment pitch in their inbox for later. They don't linger in conversations that reframe their boundaries as unreasonable. They leave the garden path before the tree is even in view. In other words, the smartest response to, did God really say, isn't a clever comeback. It's not being in that conversation long enough for the question to matter. That's the entire hidden mechanism behind self-control that actually works. It's not stronger willpower, it's fewer negotiations. So let's bring this back to Eden, because now the story reads completely differently. If Adam and Eve had obeyed, the Bible tells us the story basically stops being dramatic. No exile, no shame, just life, continuing, in the garden, boundary intact. And maybe that's exactly why we don't tell that version. It's not exciting, it's boring. It's a woman who heard a strange question, recognized what it was doing, and simply didn't answer it. But that boring version is the actual blueprint. Every day, in some small way, you get your own version of that garden moment. A rule that starts to sound unreasonable. A boundary that starts to sound like it's holding you back. A voice, sometimes a friend's, sometimes your own, asking, did they really mean that boundary applies to you, right now, in this one exception? The lesson isn't, don't ever eat forbidden fruit. Fruit isn't the point. It never was. The lesson is this. Pay attention to the very first question, not the final decision. Because by the time you're staring at the fruit, the real decision already happened a few steps earlier, in a conversation you probably didn't even notice you were having. That's the oldest story in the book. And it's still being written every single day, just with a different piece of fruit each time. If this changed the way you see that story, you know exactly what to do. Hit subscribe, because next week, we're going to walk through another one of these old stories that's actually a psychology lesson in disguise. I'll see you in the next one.